You might not remember my name, Salahuddin. Saladin Nazreen. Today we will talk about a great warrior who made the impossible possible and, by defeating a mighty Christian army, conquered Jerusalem. This is an event from the 12th century when Sultan Salahuddin was camping with his army in the evening. Outside his camp, a young girl was standing. She wanted to enter the tent, but fear made her body tremble. Finally, gathering courage, she lifted the tent flap and entered, trembling with fear. In front of her sat the Sultan of that time. The Sultan looked at the girl and asked, "What is the purpose of your visit?" The girl, trembling, said, "I have come to ask for a gift from you." The gift was the name of a city that the Sultan had conquered after a 38-day battle and thousands of lives lost. For this city, Sultan Salahuddin had risked his own life. Yet he could not refuse this girl. He said, "If you ask for a gift, this land is yours." With that, he gave the girl much wealth and sent her back from his camp. The Sultan knew that this girl had been sent by his enemies, yet he accepted her request because she was the daughter of Mohsen Nuruddin Jangi. Yes, Nuruddin Jangi, who had once seen the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in a dream and had killed 2 Jews who had dared to tunnel towards the Prophet's blessed grave. The girl who came to ask Sultan Salahuddin for the city was not an ordinary person, and neither was the Sultan she approached. His name was Salahuddin Yusuf, known to the world as Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi. Today we are showing you the biography of this remarkable figure from history, Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi. Just as he had handed over the city to a girl, his rise to power was not easy. Every step required battles and struggles. Salahuddin Ayyubi was not a ruler by birth. His uncle, Shirkuh, was a commander, under Nuruddin Jangi. In this capacity, he would take his nephew along on campaigns. At that time, the Islamic Sultanate had split into several regions. The Abbasid Sultanate was limited to Baghdad, while most areas of Iraq and the Levant were controlled by local rulers who were constantly at war with each other. Meanwhile, Egypt was ruled by the Fatimid dynasty, and the Crusaders controlled several areas including Jerusalem. In these circumstances, Nuruddin Jangi captured most of the Levant and sent forces to help Egypt. Salahuddin Ayyubi joined this army and went to Egypt. At that time, Egypt was so corrupt that the Fatimid Sultanate had become very weak. Power lay more with the vizier than the caliph. By then, Salahuddin Ayyubi had become the commander of the army after the death of his uncle Shirkuh. He deposed the Fatimid caliph and began ruling Egypt himself. Egypt had never seen such a generous ruler. As governor, he distributed all of Cairo's treasury to the poor and kept not even a single penny for himself. Salahuddin Ayyubi might have lived his life just as Egypt's governor, but the death of Nuruddin Jangi sparked a revolution in his life. Courtiers had divided the Jangi family's sultanate among themselves. Seeing this situation, Salahuddin transformed Egypt into a separate sultanate and became its sultan. He then decided to teach a lesson to the conspiratorial nobles of Jangi and attacked the Levant. He wished that Nuruddin Jangi's son would support him, but he was under the conspirators' influence. Salahuddin quickly conquered Damascus and became ruler over a large territory from Egypt to the Levant. Sultan Ayyubi was compassionate, generous, and brave, but his greatest quality was his magnanimous heart. He praised the virtues of his enemies and, when the opportunity arose, could even turn former enemies into allies. One such enemy had thirsted for the Sultan's blood, but by the Sultan's kindness, he became his greatest friend. This man was Sheikh Sanan, the leader of the Firqa Bania, who ruled the Khalat Jaf of the Levant. This group trained ordinary people to become formidable killers known as Fidai. The Fidai often used hashish and were therefore also called Hassan. Later, the word Hassan became assassins in English, meaning deadly killers. The assassins were so feared that even major Islamic rulers trembled at their name. One day, the Fidai received orders to kill Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi. The reason? Nuruddin Jangi's former nobles realized they could not defeat the Sultan in open battle, so they resorted to conspiracies. They bribed Sheikh Sanan with wealth to carry out the Sultan's assassination. Sheikh Sanan agreed, and the Fidai set out. First, a group of killers attempted the task but failed and were killed. Then, A killer entered the Sultan's tent and attacked him with a dagger. The Sultan wore a turban over a metal helmet, so the dagger could not harm him. His guards killed the Fidei. Yet, another attacker came, then another, but each was defeated. The Sultan realized that as long as Sheikh Sanan was alive, his life would be under constant threat. So he marched with a large army to the location where Sheikh Sanan was, but Sheikh Sanan paid no attention to the attack. One night, a strange event changed the course of the situation. The Sultan was sleeping in his tent when he suddenly woke up. He saw the lamps extinguished and another presence in the tent. He called his guards. When the lamps were relit, they saw a dagger near the Sultan's bed, with a note saying, "The king is safe, our mercy is upon you. Be aware." The Sultan was astonished. He had his guards inspect the area and found footprints leading away, but no one was caught. Sultan Ayyubi was so impressed by the enemy's bravery and skill that he befriended Sheikh Sanan, turning a former mortal enemy into a loyal ally. This alliance became so strong that Sheikh Sanan, once thirsty for the Sultan's blood, fought alongside him against their enemies. Ronaldo began advancing towards the Sultan. The Sultan selected the Hattam region to decisively defeat the Crusaders. This region had only a few water springs, and most of the land was barren and desolate. The Sultan's army camped near the water sources, while the Crusader forces had to cross a 20-kilometer area with no water at all. Some Crusader commanders warned that advancing further was dangerous because their army would have no water. But Guy ignored them, confident that no one could defeat him in battle. This confidence came from the presence of the true cross. Yes, the Crusaders had a very large cross with a visible wooden piece. The Crusaders believed this piece belonged to the original cross on which Jesus, peace be upon him, was crucified, and that it had always brought victory. Guy and his companions thought that with the true cross present, they would also win, so they ignored all the difficulties of the journey. However, this was their greatest mistake. As their army advanced, they suffered from extreme heat and thirst. By the time they reached the Sultan's forces, they were exhausted. At night, the Sultan's soldiers infiltrated Salibio's camp and set fire to the hay for the horses. The Crusaders had no water to extinguish the fire, and the heat intensified their thirst. They could not sleep all night. On July 4, 1187, the Sultan attacked the Crusader army. The Muslims rained poisoned arrows, killing hundreds of Crusaders. The Muslim forces then advanced and overwhelmed the rest. Most of the Crusader soldiers fled without fighting, and those who remained had no strength to resist, so they were easily captured. The true cross also fell into Muslim hands. Both Ronaldo and Guy were taken prisoner. The Crusader soldiers were dying of thirst, so the Sultan ordered them to be given water. Guy was given cold rose water, but Ronaldo was severely punished. The Sultan personally beheaded him. Guy, seeing this, feared it was his turn, but the Sultan reassured him, saying kings do not kill kings. Next, the Sultan advanced towards Jerusalem. The city's ruler was already in captivity, so the Sultan expected an easy conquest. However, the Crusaders fiercely resisted the Sultan's army for over a week, causing heavy casualties on both sides. The Sultan's forces bombarded the walls with fire, terrifying the Crusaders, who feared their families might be enslaved if the city fell. Finally, the Crusaders surrendered and called upon the Sultan's mercy. The Sultan, showing compassion, granted it. When the Crusaders had captured Jerusalem 88 years earlier, rivers of blood had been shed. But now, as Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had forgiven his enemies after the conquest of Mecca, Sultan Salahuddin also forgave his enemies. He set a condition. Every Christian man must pay 10 dinars, and women 5 dinars, to gain their freedom. Those who could not pay would become slaves. Interestingly, the religious leaders of the Crusaders immediately paid the sum and left unharmed. Their leader even brought chests full of jewels to the Sultan's army. However, the poor Crusaders who could not pay were still spared. Some were so impressed by the Sultan's justice that they stayed in the city. On October 2, 1187, Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi gained full control of Jerusalem, returning it to Muslim hands after 88 years. He also freed Guy of Livn, who abused his freedom by helping the Crusaders take control of a nearby coastal city. The fall of Jerusalem shocked all of Europe. In Britain, taxes were imposed to raise an army against the Sultan. It was announced that those fighting against the Sultan would have their sins forgiven. In Germany and France, women sold their jewelry to help fund the Crusader army. As a result, Richard the Lionheart arrived with troops from France and Germany, taking command of the Crusader forces. Muslims and Crusaders were engaged in intense battles. During this time, Sultan Salahuddin fell seriously ill, weakening his army's position. He was advised to go to a safe place, but he refused to abandon his companions. Meanwhile, Richard attacked Acre while the Sultan, ill, could not send reinforcements. Muslims in Acre surrendered, and the Sultan offered a deal to Richard. If the Muslim prisoners were released, the true cross would be returned. Richard refused, claiming some Crusader leaders were not trusted. Richard continued negotiations for some time, but his impatience led him to execute 4,000 prisoners, including women and children. This enraged the Sultan, who sent the true cross to Damascus, where it disappeared from history, and its whereabouts remain unknown. Richard then captured another coastal city, Jaffa, but returned without conquering it fully. The Sultan advanced toward Jaffa, and both armies clashed again, but no decisive result occurred. Richard fell ill, and the Sultan sent him medicine and personally attended to him. Richard began worrying about news from his homeland, where his brother had rebelled, and eventually, he made peace with the Sultan. Under this treaty, some coastal cities remained in Crusader hands, but Muslims were allowed to visit Jerusalem. Thus ended the 3-year war between Richard and Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi. After the Crusaders' retreat, the Ayyubi dynasty could finally live in peace. Sultan Salahuddin returned to Damascus, but his heart longed for Hajj. His busy life had prevented him from performing the pilgrimage. Upon his return, the Hajj season had passed, and he wept deeply. When a returning caravan of pilgrims arrived, the Sultan went far to greet each one personally. Eventually, he fell seriously ill, suffering from a fever and cold to the point where he lost consciousness. Quran reciters continuously recited at his bedside, while citizens of Damascus gathered daily outside to inquire about his health. On the morning of March 4, 1193, Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi passed away peacefully. The citizens mourned deeply, and he was buried in Damascus. Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi always treated his enemies justly and never waged war, except out of extreme necessity. Despite this, some people in the West refused to accept Muslim control of Palestine. During World War I, French and British forces defeated the Ottoman Empire and seized Arab lands. French General Henri Grard even went to Sultan Ayyubi's grave in Damascus and kicked it, saying, "We are back." Even today, some portray him as a relentless conqueror and enemy of non-Muslims, but the truth is different. Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi was not motivated by hatred, worldly wealth, or conquest. He was a man who relieved others from hardships and left the world better than he found it, allowing us to live in peace.